Last time we talked to him, he had a sweet backdrop of a
brick wall. I
thought he was at a tavern. It was the media center. Farhan, do we want to start,
please,
with your clip?
Yes.
About the Super Bowl. Do we have that?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's Farhan on Friday. What are they going to do to shut down KC? What's going to happen here?
In order for Philadelphia to win this game, they have to take a page out of Tampa Bay's playbook in 2020. They have to be able to get to Patrick Mahomes inside of 2 seconds. They've got to get him off his spot and move him. If you give him 2.5 seconds, he gets through his first progression and he sets up how he's going to escape. If you take 2.5, he's going to beat you. If you can get there fast, like happened in 2020, there's going to be problems for Kansas City. They can't just lean on their run game. The other thing with Philadelphia is they're the best screen defending team in the league, and we know how Kansas City and Andy Reid love their screen game to get the ball out quick because those guys tackle so well. So they have to get to them immediately, and they have the ability to do that. But if they don't, Kansas City's going to win this game.
There it is. We had thousands of views on that. Farhan, that's pretty good stuff.
But you did predict that Kansas City would win the football game, and I followed you and bet on it accordingly.
Sorry, Sharky. Well, I go through this every year at a big sporting event, right? Like when you're waiting a week and you cover it, whether it's the college national championship or the Grey Cup or the Super Bowl, you come into the week with a certain thought of what's going to happen, and then you spend the entire week convincing yourself it's going to go the other way. And then in the end, it kind of goes the way you thought it was going to begin with. So I picked Kansas City at the start of the year. I picked them at the start of the playoffs. So I wasn't going to waver. But then I did spend the week trying to convince myself how it could go the other way, which came out in that clip. So, I should have gone that way. I wasn't shocked that Kansas City really, really struggled against that defensive line. I was just really disappointed. A couple things. You go back to that 2020 game I referred to, Mahomes still played well. He didn't play well in this game. Now, that's not all his fault. And I thought Andy Reid coached really poorly. And at some point in my show with you that day, I probably said that Mahomes will find a way to win, and I don't bet against I don't bet against Andy Reid after 2 weeks to prepare. I talked about screens in that clip. First 2 plays Kansas City ran offensively were a play off a screen and then a screen. And they didn't get much out of the second one. They stopped doing it, right? They never ran the ball. They ran the ball all year. Never ran the ball. I thought they did such a poor job of coaching, and Mahomes made mistakes you don't see him make.
I thought Andy Reid looked lost. I really did. I thought we're in what? Who are we playing?
I want to ask Farhan this, because this is the one that stuck out for me, is they came out of halftime, and we've seen the great coaches, the great quarterbacks come at it, different game plan. Heck, you coach football. That's your time to change things up, come out with something different. They came out and still looked feeble.
Yeah, exactly the same.
Yeah, they had back-to-back sacks on that first drive, right? And it had to happen then. I think that, the pick six that made it 17-0 really changed the game. Every other playoff game, like in all the Super Bowls, they've had 10-point deficits. That pick six changed things entirely because they really were limited then coming into the second half with how they could adjust. Because while they didn't run the ball in the first half, it meant they couldn't run the ball in the second half. At 10-0, you've still got a chance. And so they 3-and-out, and they kick the ball, and then they get the ball back, and then they throw the interception to Zach Bond shortly thereafter. So just the mistakes they were making and the amount that Mahomes tried to force it. So teams can adjust when it's close. When it's 17-0, you still have a level of desperate in you, and it's hard to adjust.
Not only hard to adjust, but Philadelphia they were so high in terms of how much control they had over the game and how much control. Everything they wanted to do was right. Like everything they wanted to do was working right. Literally, I'm sure they went in at halftime and said, "Don't stop, just keep going."
Yeah, I mean, to a point, right? Because the one thing they clearly wanted to do and didn't do well was run the ball, right? And I remember being on another interview last week, and I said, this is not going to be about Saquon. Jalen Hurts has the ability to throw the football down the field. I know it's been a weird year, but I saw him do it in the Super Bowl 2 years ago, and you knew that Kansas City's attention was going to be on Saquon. And they didn't load the box, but you could tell where their linebackers were focused. So, the one thing they couldn't do, ultimately they didn't need to do because Jalen Hurts was so good for a second consecutive Super Bowl. But, and then when you get up by a certain amount, score effects do matter, right? And so it forces Kansas City to do certain things. Philly still attempted to run the ball just to shorten the game. Even if it wasn't going to be big runs, it still took time off the clock. So, it all worked, and they were extremely comfortable from the opening series. The Eagles were.
Okay, so I said this the other day. I think it was on the show. If you are, let's say, the Los Angeles Chargers, because I do think they have a really good coach, they don't pick, I just had to look it up, they don't pick till 22nd in round 1. Isn't that now the blueprint to follow, is find the best, and I know this is hard, 4 down linemen that you don't need to blitz, that you get to him with 4. Find the best, spend whatever money, because that's what works. That's how you beat KC.
Well, that's kind of how you beat anybody, really, right? Like, when you look at the New England Patriots and they lost to the Giants in two Super Bowls, that was the same formula, right? They were able to get pressure with 4. They ran the NASCAR package. They did all of this, got Brady off his spot. And, it's funny because in the case of Kansas City, you want Mahomes to hold the ball longer. You don't want him to escape downfield, but you want him to hold it longer. So, everyone's going to try it to a point. It's a copycat league, but it's hard to get those linemen because you can't have just 4. You better have 6, maybe even 8, so you can rotate through them because that's how the league's evolved. Personally, I think the Chargers coach is a fraud, and if they don't win quickly within 2.5 years, he's going to get run out again because he's a short shelf life guy. I know you like him. I'm not a fan of Harbaugh.
I don't like him.
I like John. I don't like Jim. He's a weirdo, and I think he's fraudulent. But, he was supposed to bring the best out of Justin Herbert. He didn't do that this year. We'll see how that changes. But, look, ultimately, I still think – let's take it this way. In 2020, when they had that bad offensive line and Tampa worked them, what happened that offseason? They drafted 1 and signed 2. They drafted 1 and signed 2. And that's what Brett Veach is going to do again. He is going to make sure that is not a problem. He's going to acquire another receiver, and he's going to get that offensive line figured out because that's what he does. And the Kansas City Chiefs are going to be right back here again.
Who tries to follow the model this year? I don't even know what's out there. You'd know better than me. As far as a running back, where Saquon ends up in Philly last year. Speaking of the copycat thing, who's going to try and do that this year, and who's available?
Well, nobody really, right? Because when you look at that level of pedigree in a running back, right? I mean, to me, there's 3 of them, right? You've got one of them with Saquon. You've got Derrick Henry, who had a better year than I expected him to have with the Ravens, just because of the styles, right?
McCaffrey.
Could McCaffrey become available? I don't think so because they've made moves in other areas, right? And now all of a sudden, Deebo Samuel wants to trade. Right. So you still have to hang your hat on the best player in that building when he's healthy, and that's Christian McCaffrey. And it's hard to keep him healthy. And I think Josh Jacobs is the other one, right? That I think he's got the ability to be a guy that can really, really carry the load, but he's not available either. So I don't know that a team's going to go out there and get them. And you've probably got 8 teams that are going to be looking for quarterbacks. And there's not many in the draft that are any good, right? You've got 2 that have first-round grades, maybe 1 more that's a second-round grade. So, I could see some guys there on the move, but I don't know that all of a sudden. Now, might it elevate an Ashton Genty from Boise State? Might it elevate a Travion Henderson from Ohio State? Like some of these guys might find themselves going higher up in the draft. But I do think that teams are still not going to want to build around running backs. I still think they're going to want to tandem them and have a couple of guys like Detroit has done and try to manufacture a run game with 2 guys that you're paying less to.
We talked about the copycat. We're going to do something that somebody else did successfully. But you've got to look at Detroit and go, look what they did. Look how successful they were. I mean, by all accounts, Detroit should have been in that Super Bowl game from everything they did all season long. Weren't there, should have been there. So I don't think the copycat, we're going to do exactly what Philadelphia did as the answer. I think there are teams that got to make sure what they do, whatever it is, they got to do really, really well.
Well, you're right. And it's a tough window to live in, right? And you look at a player like Or you look at a team like Detroit, and they rebuilt their offense, right? Like you talk about running backs, they had 2 really good ones last year. They traded them both out for 2 really good ones this year. And it was unfortunate for Detroit that they had all those injuries on the defensive side of the ball. You assume they're not going to go through that again, and they're going to be healthier. So I don't think they need to fix anything because it ain't broke in Detroit. But you're right. Like, find what your identity is, Sharky, and get really good at it, right? And it's got to be sustainable, and it's got to be a strategy that's going to work for you in the playoffs. I think Kansas City's been able to win for so long, so many different ways. Early on, it was Mahomes carrying them. They went through a stage when they won the Super Bowl last year where it was really built a little bit more on defense. So there are ways to do it, but I think the Philadelphia model doesn't grow on trees, but you've such a tight sweet spot because how long are your guys going to stay available? So here's the big thing with Philadelphia. They had 7 starters on defense that were on their rookie contracts. They had, I think, between they had 32 players on their offensive and defensive depth charts that were playing on their rookie contracts. Yeah. So they've only got 2 guys. I mentioned them earlier with Zach Bond and Josh Sweat, who had the 2.5 sacks and the 6 pressures in that game. Those are the 2 guys that are going to want the bag, right? Their GM, Howie Roseman, did a good job. He went and got Landon Dickerson, their offensive lineman, signed. They got Devontae Smith signed. So the other guys that were kind of in that window, so they don't have a lot of work to do. They can sustain the model because you got a tight model to win in a sweet spot before all of a sudden 2 or 3 guys need to get paid big. Cincinnati's going through that right now, right? So, find your formula, and you got 2 to 3 years to figure it out, and that's it.
Okay, last NFL before we go to CFL. Where do you think Aaron Rodgers will play football next year?
Vegas. Actually, no, let me take that back. Do you think he goes to Vegas?
I think that's strong. I don't like it. I think he ends up there.
Yeah, look, I've heard that a lot, and it makes sense. But here's a team. If you ask me, the teams that want to go get a quarterback, don't go get Aaron Rodgers. Go get Kirk Cousins. Like, Kirk Cousins faltered a little bit down the stretch, but he's younger, and his sample size the last 4 to 5 years has been much better, right? Like, you take those, the small sample size he had where things faltered. I think you can have a reclamation project there more likely than you can have with Aaron Rodgers. But, I could absolutely see it happening that he goes there. I don't know that Pete Carroll and Aaron Rodgers are necessarily going to fit, but you never know. Everybody's about short term right now. When you're Pete and you're as old as he is, they're going to just kind of figure it out.
Both guys with Achilles problems too. Get that boot ready.
Yeah,
that's scary.
Carry a couple of spare Achilles boots.
Okay, CFL.
Yeah,
it's funny when I look at the futures. The Toronto Argonauts are still the favorites to win the Grey Cup. After free agency, where we're kind of settling now, we kind of knew what was going to happen. Can you give us a winner out of all this in the last few weeks?
Well, look, you can't not say the Edmonton Elks are the winner, right? When you look at the players they've added, and they just added Stephen Dunbar like an hour ago to go along with the 12 new players they signed, 5 Canadian starters, new Canadian starters, rebuilding their defensive line. They're the winner. Does that mean they're the Grey Cup favorite? I'm not going to say that because we still have a lot of questions about Trey Ford and his ability to do it over 18 games. Remember what happened to Toronto a year ago at this time? They got raided by everybody, and they lost half their defensive line last year. And everybody wondered, what's going to happen to the Argos? Well, guess what? They won the Grey Cup again, right? So I'm not going to write them off. I think John Murphy does a really good job in terms of finding talent, and especially import talent. So, I think they're going to be just fine. So I get why they are where they are. And then you're going to have, Chad Kelly fully healthy and everything like that. And that's going to be a good thing for them, even though he might miss a little bit of time early, but I think he'll be their quarterback for the bulk of the season. So I get why Toronto's sitting where they're sitting.
What's the biggest head scratcher for you so far to come out of it?
Oh boy, good question. The biggest head scratcher. I don't know. Like I expected more from certain teams, right? I know that Calgary talked about being really aggressive, and I thought they would, and they weren't, right? Like they did add pieces, but they didn't necessarily add the high priced pieces. They did make a pitch for Geno Lewis. He actually got offered more by Calgary than what Ottawa offered him, and he wound up staying there. But I don't know that they've affected their roster. I'm not sure how much they've impacted their roster with big name guys, right? I thought Saskatchewan did some good work. BC, I didn't expect them to be that active just because I knew where their cap situation was when you look at what they were paying Rourke, McInnes, and Betts. So that didn't really surprise me. And, like Winnipeg, this is the one I want to see, because this is the first time you've seen Winnipeg lose this much and go out and get this much. Because even when they've lost some pieces they couldn't pay, they still go out and they build internally. They don't go out and get a bunch of guys. Well, they went out and got a lot of guys this offseason. And, Mike O'Shea likes his veterans, but there's going to be some change there, including an offensive coordinator. So is this the year Winnipeg kind of falters a little bit? They're the ones that probably surprised me the most.
Let's get you to talk about our Riders here. They bring in veteran Philippe Gagnon on the offensive line. Gags, as Durant calls him.
You just like saying his name, don't you?
I was a French major.
I'm sure you were. Shinkaruk.
And
rolls off the tongue.
And then Sean McEwen, right, coming over. So the offensive line, we know about it. We talked about it ad nauseum last year. What happened? Is there moves in Riderville that you like more so than the other ones?
Well, look, I'm not sure McEwen had a great year last year. I get the All-Star recognition and all of that, but from what I hear around the league, like the film wasn't what it had been previously for Sean McEwen, and that's why he had to wait until the end of the first week of free agency, right? Because nobody was going to pay him significant sums of money. So Saskatchewan was able to get him on a fairly team-friendly deal. So if he can have a bounce-back season, ultimately, I think he's an upgrade over Peter Godber, right? And they got more out of Peter Godber than BC ever got out of him. But I do think that McEwen's a better player, even if he's gotten a little older, right? And I think Philip Gagnon's a pretty good player. So I do think that they've improved their offensive line. Just getting Jamarcus Hardrick back and healthy is going to improve that offensive line as well. And, with a guy like Trevor Harris can still play the game at a really high level, but you got to protect him, right? You can't ask him to extend and run around and take a bunch of hits. You've got to find a way to protect him. And even if he gets dinged up and Jake Mayer has to come, Jake Mayer's not going to move. Like Jake Mayer, despite his age, probably moves less than Trevor Harris does. So you need to make sure your offensive line is really stout.
We talked to Tommy Stevens the other day. Tommy Stevens wants to show everyone that he can sling it.
Yeah.
Mississippi State style.
Yeah,
right? He played SEC.
He's not going to get that option. He is going to be I call those guys that are only short yardage guys plungers. That's what he's going to do, right? He's going to be there on 3rd and 2 and 3rd and 1, and that's what he's going to be asked. He's not going to be asked to rip it unless two guys in front of him get hurt. Their depth chart is pretty clear at the position.
I predict, write it down in the book. Early on in the season, he's gonna bomb one out. What the one? And I think a lot of people are confused.
Well, yeah, he might in the short yardage package. He might do in the short yardage package as a gadget play, but don't expect him to come in as the number 2 quarterback and do it, from a spread formation.
Laybourne, another running back in the fold in Saskatchewan. That is kind of the noodle scratcher for a lot of people here. What is there writing on the wall there? Are we worried about the health of AJ? What do you think on this one?
No, I think they've got some pretty good depth there, and I think that AJ Ouellette's still going to be the guy. But he's always kind of been that muscle-bound player that you need to manage his reps, right? And whether it was in Toronto or he got some work with Andrew Harris and they were able to reduce his load, he spent a lot of time injured last year in Saskatchewan. They're a better team with him in the game, but they got to do everything they can to keep him healthy, and that means manage him.
I don't disagree with you. He needs managing off-season and regular season. He's trying to squat 700 pounds. Like, look after yourself, man.
And
just work on 300 pounds. Yeah. But you can't control everything they do all the time. I like depth. I do. I like depth. I like the moves they made depth-wise, both on the lines and at running back. Entirely over the course of the season, you're going to need everybody to be able to play. Nobody goes 18 games without being Knicks, so I like the depth they've added to the mix.
Enjoy the hockey game last night?
Tremendously.
What?
It was fun, wasn't it?
How do we ever go back to an All-Star game?
you don't, but you're going to have to at some point. Like, look, I'm not big on NHL manufactured events, right? Like, this is a nice trophy they put together. Once it's done, it's going to collect dust in the Hockey Hall of Fame, I guess. And 10 years from now, people will be like, what's that for? Right. So these guys aren't necessarily playing for the jersey and the logo, like the flag, right? I think a lot of these guys are playing to wear the flag at the next Olympics, right?
Yeah.
I thought the pace of this game was incredible and the players were invested. I didn't see the physicality that you see when you get to the Stanley Cup final or the Stanley Cup playoff, or, look, it's a mile better than an all-star game for sure. And the tournament will only ramp up, but, I'm still an Olympics guy when it's true best on best. But I thought last night was a lot of fun, especially in that overtime.
I think you'll see a physical game when Canada plays the United States. I think that'll change dramatically.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah.
I can see that for sure.
JT Miller, like we talked about the sandpaper on both sides, where it could be. But the one thing is, like, let's be honest, the goaltending, how everybody, and you could see it on social media, jumped on Binnington after that shot, which was a great shot. Yeah. And then, so do you think they go to Hill for the next game?
I don't. And I just think John Cooper has Andrei Vasilevsky, so he's of the mindset of running with a guy. So if it was me, I would play Aiden Hill. I thought two of the goals that he let in last night were not good. But one thing with Jordan Binnington loves him some Jordan Binnington, right? Like, you're not going to meet a lot of guys that are as confident as he is in terms of his ability to be great and bounce back. And, some guys say it, but they're kind of nervous when the spotlight's on him in games like this. He believes it. So I think they probably feel he can reset. But those were two bad goals. Now, he made an incredible save in overtime, got better when the game was tied. But I'd give Aiden Hill the next game and then decide on the two of them and give the next guy the Finland game and the championship game if they get there, right? So I don't think he earned it. I don't think he did enough to play the next game, but I think he's going to.
So Barney had a question earlier. I'm going to steal his question. He might be looking for this one to you. What are these players getting out of it? What kind of scratch is coming back to them?
Lettuce.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the financial arrangement around this was. I'm sure there is something because, the NHL does give money out to all-star participants and things like that. But I think they all want to play. Like, they really want to be a part of this. Whereas, the all-star games in every sport, everybody wants to be selected. Nobody wants to play, right? Whereas here, they actually want to play. So, But I truly believe the biggest reason these guys want to play is to make an impression on USA Hockey, on Hockey Canada, on their country's national programs to be selected for the next All-Star or for the next Olympics, for the next best on best. And they want to make their mark in it right now. And that's the main reason why they're so invested.
The NHLPA is making big money. So there's some sort of there's lettuce going down for sure. Okay, so
for sure.
Close on this. Because you're in the know and you talk to a lot of people. I only talk to one.
No, I'm not in the know. I just say no a lot.
Yeah. I talked to a guy yesterday, and he's like, next week I'm free. Interview anytime. Right now I'm in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Where have you heard a lot of NHL play? Where have you heard a lot of them going?
Yeah, a lot in Hawaii, but a lot in the Caribbean. There's Cancun, there's Cabo, there's there's an NHL GM I know that's in Cabo right now.
Yeah.
So it just kind of depends where you're based. If you're an East team, you wind up kind of going down there towards the Mexican side, and if you're on the west side here, you can get to the west side of Mexico or get to Hawaii. But there's and I'm wondering if like a Chris Tanev has brought his hockey gear with him to Mexico.
That's
right?
what I was gonna say. Like that helicopter a guy in. It's like I've been at the lobby bar the whole time.
Could you imagine him showing up with a sunburn? Right? Yeah, like I can play, but I need some extra aloe vera to the training staff. Could you imagine?
I can. It'd be awesome. It'd be fantastic to have him show up like that. You kind of want
to see it.
Yeah, you really do.
And how many guys will take Yeah, I can't make it. It's going to be interesting. All right, Farhan. Thanks so much. And do you have Canada winning this thing?
I haven't given it much thought. I wanted to not give a damn yesterday, and then they kind of reeled me in a little bit, right? But I went into it thinking, Bettman and his manufactured events, spare me. But now I'm invested. Everybody tells me the U.S. has the best roster, so I'm going to what I do know is the U.S. has the best goaltending. Like, if you look at their goalies, their top 3 are all in the top 5 in this tournament, right? So, they're certainly stacked there. I can only imagine what that would look like if Quinn Hughes was playing for them. So I think they've got the better roster. But you know what? They got to do it. Like, Canada wins best on best. And they got to show they can beat Canada, whether their roster's better or not. And at the end of it all, like, the top of the roster, there's nobody the U.S. has that's as good as McDavid or McKinnon, right? They may be deeper throughout the roster, but Matthews is not one of those two guys. So, at the end of the day, and when you look at Sid coming off an injury, playing the way he did last night, I'm not betting against Canada.
Nope. 26-0 now? We're in the C?
Yeah.
Sid is 26-0, yeah. I think it was the pre-tournament game before the 2010 Olympics started here in Vancouver when he lost to the U.S. That was the last time he lost.
Old man Sid. Used to be Sid the Kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
His Grandpa Sid.
All right, Farhan, have a good weekend. Go Canada.
See you, boys.